Okay, we're 6 minutes in, and I'll go ahead and welcome our guest speaker today, Dr. Janet Bavonese. She is going to talk to us about rubrics, best practices in using rubrics, and she has been with JSU for almost 10 years now.
Mhm.
She has been the I can't believe it's been this long. The associate dean of the School of Education for 2.5 years. It
Yep.
feels like you were just named the associate dean, Janet. Uh, and she is the program director of the On to JSU program,
Mhm.
and she's the director of oh my goodness, I'm gonna butcher. It's the Center of Autism Studies.
Yes.
Yes, I got it. All right. She enjoys mentoring faculty and students, and she loves cooking and reading. And her son, well, I don't know if it's her son, your
My
child,
daughter.
your
My
daughter.
daughter.
You said, yeah, your
Yeah.
only child lives in
Said my only
Auckland.
child, but it's my daughter.
Your daughter lives in Auckland, New Zealand, which I found fascinating. So that sounds really cool. That's like the most beautiful country in the world.
It is.
And so I'm going to hand it over to you, Dr. Bevanice, and the show is yours.
Thanks, Chris. And I mentioned that about my daughter because my husband and I don't have any other children, and so we don't have any grandchildren or anything else. So I have a lot of free time, which is why I have time to do a lot of the things that I do, and I really enjoy my work, and we love traveling too. My husband and I. So COVID-19 has got us stuck at home like everyone else, and so we are doing a lot of things around the house and just kind of sticking close to our home base. But we'll be glad, like everyone else is, when we can get out again and go, especially back to New Zealand, so I can hug my girl. But anyway, welcome to this afternoon. I am going to, oh yes, can everyone, you want everyone to mute their camera? Everybody can mute their
Yeah,
camera.
go ahead and turn
Mute
off
your camera
your webcam
and your microphone.
and your microphone. Yep.
And here's what we'll do. This format, I love the virtual format, and it's fun and it's great, but I'm a kind of person that reads the room whenever I am presenting or talking. So since I can't read the room today, if you would take full advantage of the chat feature. So if you have something you want to say, if you have a question you want to ask, just jump onto the chat and type that in, and I'll be checking over there as we're going and kind of address what you're asking or what you're commenting on as we go. So the topic that Chris asked me to speak about is rubrics. So I love rubrics. And so I was happy to do this today. I have taken kind of a light look at it in this presentation, and I've got a little PowerPoint. I'm going to share my screen in just a minute and get that up. But as we're going through this today, think about how rubrics, I'm not sure, I'll tell you what, everybody kind of jump in. Let me read the room for a minute. Everybody kind of jump on the chat, and while I'm getting my PowerPoint and my screen up, tell me what you know or what you already do with rubrics. So jump on the chat and give me a little feedback so I can read the room, and I will work on sharing my PowerPoint while you're doing that. So go ahead. Okay, good. So, okay. Hang on a minute. Let me problem solve a minute, Chris, because when I shared my screen, I could not see the chat box. So let me look here just a minute. So have not been using rubrics. I didn't know what the word rubric meant until I started in my master's in ed. One of the best communication tools, yes. Rubrics are a must to have students assess their own learning. Tables, okay, new to Eric, good. mainly for big projects, starting to use for small, use them with assignments. Okay, good. So a variety of experience, have not used it yet. Find rubric as a test. Okay, so there's a lot of different thoughts out there about rubrics and experience. So let me pull up my PowerPoint again and find my shared window. Okay, here we go. Okay, so let me start off by saying that, you know, I am a reading person, I am a literacy person, and I have to tag everything to a text. So this is a little book. It's called The Important Book. So if you've never read this little book, it's by Margaret Wise Brown, who wrote the very famous children's book, Goodnight Moon. But she wrote this book, and she talks about the important things and the important thing about common things that we have in everyday life, like the important thing about an apple, the important thing about a spoon, the important thing about a blade of grass. And I love The Important Book because in everything that we do, we need to decide what is important about it. So whether we are teaching, whether we are doing something at home, whether we are traveling, no matter what we're doing in our life, we need to figure out what is important about it. And I thought about that when preparing this because I thought, what is important about rubrics? So that is the question today and kind of the topic that I'm going to explore. What is important about rubrics? So first of all, let's look at the definition that Merriam-Webster Online gives us. Rubric is a noun. It's pronounced rubric. It has 2 syllables. And Merriam-Webster lists it as a guide listing with specific criteria for grading or scoring academic papers, projects, or tests. So that is the official definition from Merriam-Webster Online. But you know, as a teacher, I want to communicate to you a more friendly definition. So I took this definition, I thought about what was important, and I came up with what I'm calling Dr. B's definition. So here it is. A rubric is a tool. It's a tool that we can use to help us list clear expectations for how we're going to assess student performance in meeting these different objectives. So a tool, in this instance, in my definition, means that I can use it as an instructor, but students can use it to understand their expectations or what we expect of them. So rubric goes both ways. It's for us as the instructors, it's for students to use to know how to adjust themselves, what to do, what you expect, and all of that. So I did a little informal poll on Facebook. Now, I have a big Facebook group of teachers. It's got about 2,000 members and a lot of friends on Facebook that are teachers, both, you know, in elementary, middle, high school, and at the university level. So I just threw the question out there. What is important about rubrics, or the important thing about a rubric? And once I got all that data, I had 98 responses within a few hours. So social media is very, very, very powerful to get information. But out of those 98 responses, I compiled common words, I compiled common ideas, and I came up with these 4 areas that were the most prominent: clarity, teachers, students, and expectations. Expectations, or something like it, was the most commonly commented in response to that question. So expectations on rubrics are very, very important. I thought it was interesting that students were mentioned more than teachers. Why? Rubrics help guide what students do. So I thought it was interesting that teachers and professors answering this question mentioned more students than teachers, even though it's a tool that teachers use to assess performance. Also, clarity. A lot of people made comments. It gives clarity to what we want students to do. It gives clarity to what we expect. So my little informal poll sort of told me, hey, expectations and clarity are important. for both students and teachers. So that kind of goes back to my friendly definition that I gave you just a minute ago. So how do you know what to do? How do you know how to build a rubric? So the first thing that you have to do is you have to think about where you want your students to go. What do you, as the instructor, want your students to demonstrate? That's what the rubric's all about. So rather than simply giving someone an A, a B, a C, a D, which you can equate performance to those things, a rubric centers more on what do I want my students to show me as their instructor. This is what I want them to do. Here's how I want it to look. So that's the very first thing you have to define as an instructor or a developer of a rubric. Where are you going to start? So to do that, we have to determine the objectives, and objectives are very important. I call them objectives. Some people call them student learning outcomes. No matter what they're called, it is what you expect students to do. As a result of your teaching, what objectives, what kind of learning do you want your students to have? So you have to define your objectives. What are the objectives for your particular project, your assignment, or your task? So what is it that you're asking students to do and to learn? And then secondly, you want to think about, are there any accreditation or other considerations like local, state, or national standards? In the School of Education, we are very big on number 2 right there. We have national accreditation, and we also have to adhere to a lot of state standards and guidelines. So every rubric that we do and create in the School of Education is aligned to multiple things. We have objectives, we have national accreditation standards, we have state standards. So we have a lot of things that we're aligning to, and then on top of that, at the university, we have the SACS standards, or the student learning outcomes, that we always have to be measuring. So that's the first thing that you need to do. Determine your objectives, and if you have anything that you need to align. Now, the next thing in best practice for creating a rubric, you have to think about what the proficiency is. So if you know that you're asking students to do something, what would you consider to be proficient, a proficient performance? Now, what is proficiency for the particular project, assignment, or task, and how is it aligned with the objective for the performance? Now, when I say performance here, I'm talking about any kind of performance. A performance could be, writing an extended response to a question. It could be teaching a lesson. It could be performing an experiment. It could even be answering multiple choice or answering other kinds of questions if you wanted to really drill down to it. So the performance is whatever you want the student to do. So what does proficiency look like, and how is it aligned with the objective for a particular performance? And then finally, how do you know it? There has to be a way to observe either the skill or the knowledge or the behavior or the attitudes. So something that rubrics do is it helps to make the learning visible. If you can't bring learning out and make it visible, you as the professor or the instructor have no idea if someone really learned it or not. So it's important to make the learning visible by using observable skills, knowledge, and behaviors. So the next thing that you want to do is you want to determine the number of levels in the particular rubric. Now, in the School of Education, we always use 4 to 5 levels. Why do we do that? We do that because we want to be able to show a range of performance. You can make as many or as few levels as you like. However, best practice says that you should have an uneven or an even number so that there can be some choice. So for example, if I just had exemplary and unacceptable here, that would be a difficult choice because it's either going to be it is or it isn't. Maybe that's applicable for what you want to do, but usually you need something in between. So we always use exemplary, proficient, developing, unacceptable, and not applicable. So proficient is always where you want to start. When you design a rubric, you want to start with the proficient. Don't try to start with the exemplary, and don't try to start with the unacceptable. First define what do you expect out of that proficient performance. Now, we always include not applicable. You may or may not want to have a not applicable level on your rubric. Our teacher candidates do a lot of teaching. We go and observe them. We go and see what they're doing. We watch them when they teach a lesson, and we usually have not applicable on there because there could be events that could happen where, for example, a teacher candidate is using something on technology and the school's internet goes down. Well, we're not going to give that student an unacceptable rating because she couldn't use the internet. We're going to give her a not applicable because the internet was down. So we always include not applicable. You may or may not want to include it depending on what the task or the performance is. So you also can decide when you're deciding on your levels if you want to tie performance to a numerical score or to a performance level. So sometimes you'll see a numerical score like exemplary will be 4 and proficient will be 3 and developing will be 2 and unacceptable will be 1 or 0. So you can decide if you want to do that. Generally in the School of Education, we stick with the performance levels. So we say we expect everyone to perform in the proficient range on every objective that we give them. But if you're using a rubric to grade something or to generate a numerical score for grading or something like that, then you probably want to tag a number to your performance levels. And of course, that's up to you. You could make, you could make every indicator worth 3 points, or you could make every indicator worth 1 point. You can design that yourself to fit the needs of your class. And, depending on what you put on your syllabus and depending on what you want your students to do. I've done it multiple ways over time. So how do you write descriptors? So the first thing is, and I mentioned this before, you start with proficient. What does it mean to be proficient in something? So you start with that and you kind of define it out and think to yourself as the instructor, how would you explain what proficient in this thing, whatever this objective is, how would you explain to students what proficient means there? That's where you start. Then you go up one and you define exceptional or exemplary. What adds to the proficient performance? So you're starting with proficient and then you're saying, now what brings it up a notch? Then you go down a notch. How do you define developing? What is missing then from the proficient performance? So you see, proficient anchors how you're going to define the two things on either side of it. So you need to know solidly what proficient is, and then you anchor with that, go up or go down in the description. Then finally, you can just define unacceptable, what's missing from the developing performance, and then not applicable, depending on if you want to use that. Now, when you're writing those, how do you know what to write? If you're developing a rubric and you're the instructor, you can make those decisions. The easiest thing to use is Bloom's taxonomy. So Bloom's taxonomy can help you define observable ways that you know that something is proficient, that it's exceptional, that it's developing, or that it's unacceptable. So depending on the task, now if you're not familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it's really easy. You can just Google it, and there's literally hundreds of documents, verb lists, word descriptions that come up. And I'm going to show you some examples in just a minute on some School of Education rubrics, but you can Google that, you can take a look at it. Bloom's taxonomy will tell you, what it means if you're creating a task for students to remember something, or if you're creating a task for students to create something. Use the verbs that go along with the Bloom's taxonomy list, and that will help you to write the descriptors. So remember, you're going to start with proficient. You're going to use Bloom's taxonomy to get something that's observable. And then you're going to go to the higher, add there, define the exceptional or exemplary. Then you're going to go back to proficient, anchor, go down, write a description for the developing, and then go down from developing to the unacceptable, and so on and so forth, depending on how many levels you have. I don't recommend that you have more than 5 levels. That starts to get too many. Somewhere between 3 and 5 is best. We use 4 in the School of Education, but somewhere between 3 and 5 is best. So once you get your rubric written, and you get it developed, you want to go back and you want to examine it. And a lot of times what we do in the School of Education, we share things, we read for each other. Sometimes we send rubrics out to our cooperating teachers, for example, that work with us with our students in field experiences. If you have colleagues in your field, you can share with them and just get opinions, or you don't have to. It's just something that we do. So you want to take a look, though, and you want to make sure your objectives and your descriptors are clearly stated, because remember, in my little poll, expectations was the biggest thing that people commented. The most important thing about rubric was to set the expectations. So our objectives and descriptors clearly stated. The next thing you want to look at, what determines passing and how are you going to communicate that to students? So if you have a numerical rating and you're going to say, okay, students have to score 30 out of 35 to pass it, or students have to score all in the proficient range to pass, you need to determine that and decide how you're going to communicate that to students. Because again, students and expectations, 2 of the most important things about rubrics. You want to make sure you're communicating well what you expect and what students need to do. You also need to make sure that the rubric matches what you are asking students to do. So if you create an assignment, if you're the professor or the instructor, you create an assignment and someone hands you a rubric, maybe that rubric's going to match, but will be better off to customize it to your assignment. So always make sure your rubric matches what you are asking students to do. I've seen lots of examples when I've done work at other universities, especially for accreditation. I go on accreditation teams and look at what other schools of education are doing. Sometimes the rubrics they're using don't match what they're asking students to do, which never makes sense to me, because the point of the rubric is to give the expectations to the students. So you just need to make sure that you're matching in that way. And then finally, you want to examine to make sure all your levels are distinguishable in observable ways. So proficient should be different from exemplary. Exemplary should be what they have to do to be proficient and some more. Proficient, going down to developing, if you are proficient, you're missing something if you're developing. So you want to make sure the levels are distinguishable in observable ways. Now, sometimes people distinguish levels by saying the student did something, 6 times, or the student did something 8 times, or the student had less than 5 grammatical errors in a paper, something like that. We don't do that as much in the School of Education. We try to distinguish by using the blooms, but I have seen a lot of rubrics where people will use some numbers and kind of quantify it that way. As long as it's distinguishable and as long as it matches what you are trying to do in the project or task or performance, you can make it work. So again, these are what are important. What are the important things about rubrics? First, expectations. They are for students. They are important to teachers, and they help to clarify everything for everyone. So again, the important thing about rubrics, I think, very clear the expectations and what it can do for student performance. So I'm going to show you right now, excuse me, 2 rubrics that we use in the School of Education. So in the School of Education, as I mentioned before, we have accreditation and we have state things. We have a lot of things that we have to keep up with. And so we have what we call common rubrics. And these are rubrics that all of us are using. And they are, we have taken them through the statistical process to get validity and reliability, which is another Tuesday talk I could do, but it would be probably really boring for all of you. But we do have to do that. But let me show you the first one, how we do it. This one is called the CLP and the COBS. And the CLP stands for Common Lesson Planning Rubric, and COBS stands for Common Observation Rubric. So this is our Common Lesson Plan and Common Observation Rubric. So you can see up here at the top, we've got it defined for the students, what it means, what the purpose of it is, how we're going to use it. And then we also have the expectation for scoring. Teacher candidates are expected to score at least proficient in all elements prior to program completion. And we use this multiple times in our program, so that we don't just use this once, we use it all the way through a couple of times. This rubric has 4 levels and a not applicable: exceptional, proficient, developing, and unacceptable. We do have it quantified with a number, but we're more focused on the proficient level. So candidates have to score in this proficient column in every one of these before they can graduate from our programs. So over here, we've got our standards where we are aligned. So we've got our learning outcomes, our NTASC, which is our national teaching standards, CAPE, which is our accreditation standards. So we've got everything aligned. And then when we write these, we write them using Bloom's taxonomy. And you can see we've got standards-based instruction, prior knowledge. These are the things that we expect our candidates to do. Differentiation, we've got academic language, we've got assessment. So these are all things that we would expect our candidates to do when they are planning a lesson. And then we've got the observation component. So they plan a lesson, we score that, and then they actually teach the lesson and we score that. So when they're actually teaching, yes.
Are you trying to show your rubrics?
Yes. Am I on the wrong thing?
Yeah. Well, right. You were showing your PowerPoint.
Oh, okay. Hang on. Hold on. Sorry. I can't see what I'm showing, so I guess let me try again.
That's what we're here to help you out with.
Thank you. Now, can you see it?
Oh, yes. That's fantastic.
I'm sorry.
Can you go back? Can you go back and kind of okay, great.
Yes. So this is our common lesson planning and common observation rubric. And you can see at the top right here, we've defined how we will use it, when we will use it, and why. That's very important in a rubric too. You want to tell students why you're doing it and how their performance is going to be assessed. So this is where we have all of that right here. We talk about it. And then this last line right here, we tell them teacher candidates are expected to score at least proficient in all elements prior to program completion. So we tell them about it, and then we have the scoring element right there. Now, if you look down, I scroll down, this is the lesson planning rubric, which obviously we're teacher education. We're going to assess them, how they plan lessons and how they deliver lessons and those types of things. So this is our lesson planning rubric that we all use. And you'll notice here, on this side, these are my objectives, or these are my student learning outcomes. How are they going to use standards-based instruction? How are they going to use prior knowledge in a lesson? How are they going to differentiate instruction? Now, if you see all these numbers under here, this is the alignment. So a minute ago when I was talking about when we align things, do you have any accreditation standards? Do you have any standards that you have to meet for your particular profession? Do you have anything that you need to meet for state licensure, something like that? This would be where you would align those. So you can see that ours are aligned with our own learning outcomes, the School of Education. We align with something called NTASC, which is the National Teaching Standards. We also align with CAPE, which is our accreditor, Council for Accreditation of Educator Preparation. So you can see that we've aligned all of our standards here with our objectives. And then we've defined all the way across what we expect students to do, what constitutes an exceptional performance, what constitutes a proficient performance, a developing performance, or an acceptable performance. So just to give you an idea, let's look at prior knowledge. So prior knowledge is something that when our candidates are planning lessons, they need to take into account the prior knowledge of the audience. Just like I asked you to chime in on the chat, what do you know about rubrics? So prior knowledge is something we expect them to take into account with their group of learners. You can see here the proficient candidate would include connections to learners' prior knowledge and experiences and would plan opportunities to connect it to the current learning objectives. But if you hop over here to the exceptional column, it's the same thing, current learning objectives, including the use of assets and deficits from the learner's personal, community, and cultural information. So do you see how that takes it up a notch? So this is what we expect, but when a candidate is doing this, we say that's an exceptional performance. Now, if you go down here to the developing, plan includes limited connections to learners' prior knowledge with no specific opportunities. So again, this is observable. Here we have prior knowledge, they connect it, they plan it. They plan to do it, it's intentional. Here they have limitations. They might hit it or they might not. They don't have anything specific planned. Over here in the exceptional, they planned it and they went a step further and they're talking about the group of students. They're really connecting to their culture or to their community or to whatever is specific about that particular group of students. And then down here in the unacceptable, the plan just completely fails to include connections. So if you see there, you can see all of the different levels. And we define that all the way through for all of these different objectives. So that's the lesson planning one. Then we have an observation one that we use. So if you plan it, you're going to teach it. So in the observation one, we're doing the same thing, and we're looking to see what are they actually doing. What is the candidate actually doing? But it's defined the same way. We've got the 4 levels. They're all distinguished from one another, and candidates are expected to score in this proficient range. Now, we can use this particular rubric. Candidates can use it to assess their own performance. Our instructors can use it to assess the candidate's performance, and we can also use it to give actionable feedback. So if someone is in this developing area and we know that they planned some limited connections, but they didn't do anything specific right here for prior knowledge, and we know that we need them to ratchet it up a notch to go to this next proficient level, we can tell them exactly, we can anchor it back to that proficient level. We can say, hey, you know, we recognize that you had some limited connections, but next time you need to be intentional. Because right here it says planned opportunities. So we can use the rubric to give actionable, solid feedback to our candidates about what they need to do. So that's another valuable way to use a rubric. Now, I was also going to show you this rubric. This is our rubric for disposition. So we also assess candidate disposition, teacher disposition, if you will, throughout the program, and we use rubrics. Again, you'll see at the top, we have our directions, and our directions are telling us what we're doing, how we're doing it, and we say that we tell candidates here that they are expected to perform in the proficient category as well. And we have a companion document that goes along with this that tells them where we're going to assess them with this and how. But you'll see here too, here's our objectives or our outcomes. So we're looking for them to practice good communication, be punctual, so on and so forth, have good personal hygiene and appearance, engage in leadership and collaboration. And you'll see that I've got these aligned here again with those NTAS standards. Those are our national teaching standards. So this is all aligned. And you'll notice too that this follows the same format. We have exceptional, proficient, developing, unacceptable, and not applicable. And you'll notice that it ranges and that it's observable. So if we look here, let's look at professional boundaries. So it's very important for teachers to know professional boundaries, right? When we can understand even working in college, we have to have professional boundaries too. So the proficient candidate understands how to establish and maintain appropriate personal and professional boundaries with both students and colleagues. But the exceptional candidate can demonstrate professional boundaries by engaging in appropriate ongoing collaboration with students and colleagues that contributes positively to a common culture of learning. So proficient, we just establish it and we keep it. Exceptional, we're actually doing more. We're demonstrating it. We're contributing to the culture. We're doing more. If you're developing in this area, you have some understanding and you're acting appropriately with students, but you're not top notch there. You have some places probably where you can improve. And then unacceptable, the candidate injects their personal life into everything and gets in inappropriate or enmeshed relationships with students and colleagues. So you can see that here, even on a disposition or attitude type of assessment, we're defining all of these different areas and we have it set so that you can distinguish according to the performance, if that makes sense. So let me get off screen share. There we go. So let's go to the chat for a minute and kind of find out what you're thinking, or just open your mic and kind of give me some feedback or ask questions. So can you unmute yourself and you can ask questions or go in the chat or comments.
Let's see. Dana, you asked a question. Dana, was your question answered when you...
Dana, what was your question?
Yeah, I think it was answered.
Okay.
On rubrics, it may be incorrect, but I typically put, what did you have? Not acceptable. And then I have one that is missing. Like if they don't include an element that's being.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I just wondered if
yes, that would be acceptable. And depending on what your assignment is, you know, adding something like that, like if you want to say that an element is missing or a step was missing in a performance, it's, you know, whatever you decide to include there should be contextualized to what you were trying to get the students to show you. So yes, that's fine.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, good. Good. And by the way, share the rubric first. I see Chris said students see the rubric when they click on the assignment. So if you're putting a rubric in Canvas, they're going to automatically see that. But I always provide rubrics at the very beginning of a course. So when I'm first going over the syllabus and all of that, I provide all the rubrics to students so that they can see what it is I'm expecting them to do. And then I always have it posted in Canvas, or it used to be Blackboard. I would have things posted there so that they could go back to it. Because remember, it's a tool to help clarify for them what you expect. It's also a tool for you. It helps to keep me on track too.
Janet, I think every department should have some standards that all of the faculty members in the department could agree on.
Yes.
In preparation for accreditation, our department created, we may not have called all of them rubrics. We just had the learning objectives,
yes,
and the criteria, and the tables. We knew that everything was a table. So
yes.
yeah. Now the thing is, we teach some courses such as course on writing that would be interdisciplinary in some ways. So the idea would be for two departments, or maybe for JSU, to organize maybe a repository of rubrics that we can pick in, like I love your rubric, and maybe I can get some buzzwords or some words that I can include in my rubric, right? So that is wonderful, and thank you so much for sharing. Yes.
Yes, and I realize it's probably a little bit confusing because it's teacher education oriented, but the principles would be the same. When you're defining a rubric, start with your proficient, really define that, nail that to your objective, because that's where you want students to try to go, and then define what would be the higher level, then define what would be the lower level. As long as you keep anchoring back to what you say is proficient, it will be much easier to create a rubric and to have it distinguishable in each level. If you try to start with the higher one, it makes it a little more difficult. If you try to start with the lower one, it makes it very difficult. So always start with what you consider to be proficient and then go from there.
We may have slightly different names. Instead of proficient, we have exemplary, we have very good, satisfactory, and unsatisfactory, something like this. But primarily we have also like four categories.
Right. So so you would start first with what you consider to be satisfactory. So yeah, I mean, what you name it is up to you. You can name it anything you want to. We in the School of Education, for accreditation purposes and all of that, we try to stick with those titles for our common rubrics. Now, if you're doing something in a particular class, and it's similar to a Likert scale, Chris, yes. But if you're doing something in a particular class and you want to say, this is good, this is very good, this is good, this is poor, this is fail. I mean, you can use those. You can use that too. You can use any scale that you want. As long as you are defining the scale, and no matter what you're using, always start with what you think will be the performance level that you want your students to attain, and then define from there. And truly, the Bloom's taxonomy does really help. I hit Bloom's taxonomy constantly when I'm doing anything. It does help to write descriptions and to do things. And you can find thousands of documents on that on the internet. Other questions? Okay, good. Chris, anything you want to add?
Hold on.
Teresa, I really like how Canvas allows us to set up rubrics and attach outcomes. Yes.
We are actually in the process of exploring, and I don't really know where we are on this, but we're in the process of exploring a portfolio tool called Portfolium that actually Canvas actually purchased a couple of years ago because they realized that their ePortfolio system was not good because it wasn't. Okay. So they went out and bought one. And so basically a lot of like rubrics, like the Canvas rubrics, and then also Canvas outcomes, if we were to adopt it, everything that would actually be done in Portfolium, the rubrics and the outcomes, and they would import into Canvas. So you would basically be doing, you would be grading the assignment, but at the same time using the other tool in the same screen to assess proficiency. Yeah. So that, I think that's one thing that that should be stressed, is that there are different types of rubrics for different situations. You might have one that will be used to grade a very specific assignment in the course, but then you also have higher level rubrics that are looking at very specific skills that you're looking for in proficiency level. So,
Chris, would those like right now in the School of Education, we use live text?
Yeah.
Because because live text, when we connect our standards on our national standards, then we can pull the data out from the backside of live text.
Yeah.
I mean, faculty can use it to assess for, grading purposes and those type things.
Right.
But for accreditation purposes, we can pull that data out from the backside by the standard, by the assignment, or by the standard, or we can pull out a particular standard that we want to look at across the board. So would this particular tool be something like that would help us to not have to have the separate live text system?
I want to say yes. But
Okay.
but I also come from the College of Education world.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know how entrenched live text is, because this is the third institution I've been in, and all three of them use live text. So, and for one very specific reason, which is for accreditation.
Correct.
Portfolium comes with an administrative panel behind which certain administrators would have access. But to cut to the chase, yes, the Portfolium admin panel will be able to run the same types of reports.
Oh, that'd be interesting. I'd love to look at that and
Okay.
looking at it. Yeah, because that's one thing that we have to do that makes rubrics very important. We have to report all of this data on performance by standard using rubrics specifically for accreditation. So,
right.
and also to meet state standards too, not just the national accreditation, but the teacher certification components that we have to deal with. We have to measure everything. So, and we're working on that right now in a process called CHIP, which is not like chocolate chip cookies, although you want to eat some when you're working on CHIP, believe me. But it's continuous improvement for educator preparation, and we're about to have to report a ton of data on that too, which is a new process in our state. So our data environment's only going to get more steep and rigorous as we're going, which makes rubrics and all of that even more important, because you can't report that everyone got an A in a class. You have to report performance by the objective. So,
right.
And the objective has to be aligned to the standard.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah.
So does anyone have any questions specifically about rubrics or, different criteria that you use? I know this topic isn't always the most exciting for a lot of people. But,
unless you're nerdy like me, Chris, I do like it. So if anybody wants to work on rubrics and they want to send me anything, I'll collaborate with you.
Yeah. Well, I was about to say, some people may not find this to be exciting, but this is one of the most important things.
It is.
Because it helps you assess and track student progress and proficiency in everything that they're doing.
Yes.
So,
and Chris, what I was saying too, when I was showing the actual rubric, and I said you can use rubrics if they're written correctly. You can really use them for actionable feedback, because you can look at a student where you're scoring the performance. You can tie that performance exactly to, hey, here's what you're going to have to do next time to score up a level. So rubrics, when they're well written and they're descriptive and they're distinguishable in levels, they can really be helpful for giving solid, actionable feedback that a student can take and say, yes, you know what, next time I need to be sure, this time I hit it, but I wasn't as intentional. Next time I need to make sure I'm doing this, and this so that I can go to that next level. And that's, one reason why rubrics, why they're so important to be written, so that those levels are distinguishable in terms of what's observable.
Yeah. I was trying to answer, Lynn. I was trying to answer your question, but it's not a short answer. That's why it took so long for me to send it. In Canvas, you find rubrics in a couple places. One, if you go specifically to an assignment after you create it, there's the rubric button is under the assignment. If you're creating a graded discussion, I don't know why they did it this way, but it's not obvious. But next to the edit button, there's that button that's the 3 vertical dots. You can click on that and there's the rubric button. Now you can access all of your rubrics if you enable the outcomes link in the course navigation menu. That's where you can access outcomes and rubrics.
Okay.
In a future update that's actually coming July 18th, rubrics will actually be a link in the course navigation menu.
Oh, that'll be good.
Yeah, so be easy to find.
All right. Good.
Well, I don't. Does anyone else have any more questions? I'm appreciative of Dr. Bavonese for coming and to talk about rubrics today.
As you say, it's not the most appealing topic, but it is a good topic, important topic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you have to publish the assignment, Lynn, and then it's actually when you have to click on the assignment title to go to an individual assignment. So if anyone has any more questions about rubrics, specifically in terms of Canvas rubrics, feel to email me. If anyone has any questions about best practices and creating really good, high quality rubrics, contact Dr. Bavonese. I'm sure she'll be glad to help you out.
I would love to. Remember, I have plenty of free time, or so I think I do.
Well, thank you for coming today. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.